You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hey, music lovers, welcome back to Modern Musicology. Let me introduce you to all of our co-hosts. We have the amazing Stephanie Seymour.
Hi, people.
And we have the equally amazing Rob Levy.
Hey, kids.
And my name is R. Alan Seiler. And this week, we have been on a 1984 kick lately. Our last two shows that we did have all been about the music of 1984. The first one was the hard rock and heavy metal releases of that year, because that was a huge year for rock and metal. And the second one was all about everything else, the pop, the soul, the rock, the soundtracks, everything else from 1984. But we saved one to dedicate a very special show to, and that is this little album. You may have heard of it, called Purple Rain. And we have a very special guest who's joining us for this discussion. This is my buddy, Jason De La Torre. How you doing, Jason?
Doing great. Glad to talk Prince. Glad to talk about Purple Rain. So I'm happy to be here.
Yay.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. Before we get too much into Purple Rain, though, we've got to get a little bit of listener feedback in. We haven't done listener feedback in quite a while now because we've had so many guests on lately, but I really wanted to get this one in. This is one from our good buddy, Eric Sensava, and this is kind of a long one, but this is talking about our last two episodes, the 1984 shows. So Eric says, hey guys, loved the 1984 shows. I turned 13 in September that year, so it was quite the pinnacle year for me in my musical taste development. Thank you, MTV and Casey Kasem. I like all of the music you all brought up, some of which I didn't really come to appreciate until a bit later in life. Sorry to bring this one up as my addition. I think I've heard a few of you diss this guy before, but I absolutely loved Reckless by Bryan Adams, which came out in November of 1984. So I suppose most of its popularity was in 85. Any teenager from that era knows the hits, so of course I wouldn't have to mention them. But this was one of the first albums that made me realize that the deeper cuts can actually be much more interesting and higher quality music than the hits. Ain't Gonna Cry and Long Gone are two examples from that album. That album triggered me to dig into the back catalog, including albums before Cuts Like a Knife, and I loved every song. I came to appreciate him in a much different light than most people think of him, i.e. sappy. And of course, stayed with him as a fan for albums after that. And Stephanie, thank you for bringing up Big Bamboon. My brother and I used to play that opening sequence over and over, Dance on Your Knees and Out of Touch, which mashed together like a medley. On the music video, which was very whimsical, they incorporated the Dance on Your Knees part. When I went to see them in concert, I was blown away when they started the concert with their band playing Dance on Your Knees very loudly. And then John came out literally on his knees and yelled, Dance on Your Knees. And then, of course, they cut right into Out of Touch. And then Daryl comes out just in time for the vocals. It was my first arena concert, and I was probably easy to impress, but it just seemed magical. So Eric, thank you so much for chiming in. We really appreciate hearing from you. And I just want to do a little self-defense here. If I ever did diss Bryan Adams, it had to be because of the later, more schmaltzy stuff. You know, that's not really my taste, and as you call it, sappy. But I really loved his first couple of albums. The first two, and Cuts Like a Knife, and even up to Reckless, I really liked him a lot. So I don't think I ever intended to fully diss him. So that's my defense. So thanks for writing. And if anybody else is wanting to respond to any of our episodes or make any kind of comments like this, please email us at modernmusicology1@gmail.com, or you can just drop a comment on any of our socials wherever you see our episodes posted. All right. So now let's talk about Purple Rain, shall we? So let me give a little bit of a very quick rundown on this thing. So after the success of 1999, Prince confronted his then manager, Robert Cavallo, and basically told him, "You're fired unless you can get me a major movie deal." So they came up with a storyline. They presented it to studios, and every studio passed on it because none of them had any faith in a musician-led film. So Cavallo produced it himself. The first draft of the script was called Dreams, and that developed into what we now know as Purple Rain. The resulting soundtrack was Prince's sixth album, and it became his first #1 record, staying in the top spot for 24 consecutive weeks, and has sold around 25 million copies worldwide. It won both Grammy and Oscar awards for Best Film Score. And in 2020, Rolling Stone ranked it #8 on their list of 500 greatest albums of all time. It was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame, and it was added to the Library of Congress's National Recording Registry, which is a list of sound recordings that are, quote, culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. So happy 40th anniversary to Purple Rain. So let's talk about this thing. And I'm going to start with you, Jason, since you are the guest this week. What do you remember about the first time that you became aware of Purple Rain? Was it one of the singles that was on the radio? Was it a video on MTV? Was it a trailer for the movie? And when did you realize that this was going to be as huge as it became?
Well, for me, and by the way, I can't believe it's been 40 years.
I know,
makes me
right?
feel like I'm 100 years old now.
That's
So,
crazy.
but for me, I had never heard of Prince. I heard Little Red Corvette. Everybody heard Little Red Corvette, but it was never really in my sphere of influence. I think I was 11 years old when Purple Rain came out, and my mom, believe it or not, took me to see Purple Rain. My mom,
Oh, wow.
yeah, I have
That's
to
an
explain
interesting movie to see with your mom.
I have to explain it because my mom, she really couldn't afford babysitters and things like that. She was a single mom, and my grandparents were really my babysitters, but they were sometimes busy, and she would take me to see R-rated movies. She'd take me to see the Freddy movies. She'd take me to see all the anything she wanted to see that happened to be R-rated. She'd take me to see it, and she liked Prince, so she took me to see Purple Rain. And the only thing I remember is that it blew my mind. I instantly fell in love with the Minneapolis funk sound. I fell in love with Prince. I fell in love with the time. I fell in love with Apollonia, and basically everything to do with Purple Rain. And then I wanted to find out, well, who the heck is this Prince guy? Has he ever made any other music? Boy, did he ever make any other music. And again, that was just a whole new world that was opened up to me. But that's my funny Prince story, is that my mom took me to go see it.
That's fantastic.
Wow.
That's great. Well, I know I don't know where I was exactly, but I mean, it was from MTV for sure, where I first saw When Doves Cry. And I remember it because I remember him in the bathtub. I think that's the opening shot, I was like, what? And I knew I really loved Prince. I loved, 1999, Little Red Corvette, all that. And was also aware of Lisa at that point, really. It was Lisa and Jill Jones, not Lisa and Wendy. But
Right.
anyway, so I do remember, definitely it was MTV, definitely it was When Doves Cry. And I remember thinking at the time what a weird sound the song had. And now knowing, that it doesn't have a bass line, that's really some kind of, special kind of sound that it had because of the absence of an instrument. But I do remember thinking of that about the song at the time.
And everybody told him, no, you got to put a bass line in, man. You got to put a bass line in. And he was like, nope, I want it this way. Let's do it this way.
So pretty much MTV, like the rest of us, I didn't actually have MTV, so I went to my friend's house to watch it, and we'd have to watch it. And then when it came on, we'd have to make sure we knew where his mother was. It was ironically, it was a very Christian household, but they didn't realize how Christian Prince was, which is, of course, the irony of this whole thing. So that's my main thing for remembering it. And then I think Let's Go Crazy got played at every high school dance I went to.
Oh my God.
Everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
To the point of like, exhaustion. So my memories of it are pretty much MTV, and you'd hear it on when I used to actually actively listen to Casey Kasem every week when I was growing up because I was weird. I remember sort of being able to follow it on the charts. I had not by that time. I was I was still young. So
You were 16, I was 18, or
Yeah.
you were 15 and 17.
Having not developed an appreciation for Hendrix at that point, a lot of it was just really strange to me because most of the soul I'd been exposed to at that time was like, Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, or a lot of the disco stuff, or Stevie
Yeah.
Wonder or Marvin Gaye. So it was kind of a new, what is this thing for me, right? And I was full on new wave kid at that point. I love the fact that like a lot of the new wave kids really embraced Prince when this came out, which was a really huge record for breaking that sort of color barrier. But in terms of the movie, I didn't see it until the 90s because it only played in 2 theaters here for 2 weeks because it was banned.
Oh.
Oh.
As all good things are.
Yeah.
And then it was picking ground, or like it was still playing in like the urban movie theaters would still have it. But the downside is that there was no way to really get there or go see it or whatever. So I think I saw it when I was out of college, or right when I was entering college. So somewhere between 87 and 89 is probably when I had seen it in full. I'd seen, parts of it. I'd probably seen the whole film in parts, but it's not really till the VHS hit that I got to see it. And then, right around the beginning of the 90s is when it started popping up in theaters again, partially because he was doing more movies later when he did Sign of the Times. But yeah, I just remember that much of it.
Unlike Rob, I don't remember at all when I first saw the movie. I literally don't even know when it was. It wasn't at that time. It had to be later on. But so like Jason, I didn't really have Prince on my radar at all. Like I knew him. I knew stuff about him because I knew Little Red Corvette, and I knew 1999, and I knew I Want to Be Your Lover. And I remember his SNL appearance, and that was like the extent of my Prince knowledge, and it wasn't really something because I was very much in my like heavy metal phase at that time. So it wasn't really something that was on my radar. But so I don't remember if I heard, because I also didn't have MTV at the time. So I don't know that it was the video that I saw first. I may have seen When Doves Cry on one of those other stations, Friday night videos or whatever.
Yeah.
It may have been that. But I do remember hearing Let's Go Crazy just played like insanity on Top 40 radio at the time, and really kind of started to connect to that song. And somehow along that path, I started to realize that this was from a soundtrack. This is from a movie, and it's a movie about Prince. And I was like, I'm not really sure what's going on. And mainly because of the guitar playing, I really started to kind of connect to Let's Go Crazy. And that's really where my Prince love started, was in 1984 because of this album. So talking about the album, we're doing our little suite of episodes about 1984. What do you think makes this album stand out from everything else that was happening in 1984 and everything else that's in Prince's catalog, either leading up to this or even after this? Because this is a very unique record. What do you think it is that makes this really stand out?
I believe, to me, it's the perfect Prince album because he was working so hard to find his voice. He started out, in the disco age where, he started out with For You and with, his self-titled album, and he was still kind of, trying to escape the whole disco funk kind of stuff. And then he tried to transition to punk and shock. And that didn't really quite work for him either. Got booed off the stage with the Stones and things like that. And then right around when he started doing Controversy in 1999, he started to really start to find his voice. And that seemed to kind of hone his skill up to Purple Rain. And then, delivering Purple Rain and having such a clear vision of what he wanted Purple Rain to be from the beginning to the end. It's basically a rock opera, honestly. And each song had vision. He didn't write just Purple Rain. He wrote the Times music. He wrote the music that was in some of the club scenes, like Des Dickerson and the Modern Airs, you know, he wrote all of that stuff as an outlet for himself to be able to kind of get all of that music out of him. It was one of his most creative periods.
Yeah.
And it is fantastic. And to me, it's still, the ultimate version of Prince, you know, with the Revolution, you know, which I personally believe was his best band.
Yes.
So.
Oh, yeah.
Totally agree with everything you say. And also the fact that he was using odd production choices, he was blending so many different kinds of music together at this point. And I also think it's pretty interesting that he was really letting the Revolution, especially Wendy and Lisa, collaborate with him. You know, and it was like, this was the first album that he really did that with. He maybe not so much lyrically, but musically. And I think that they added so much. I mean, I was reading an interview with Wendy and Lisa a while back. I was on a Wendy and Lisa kick, as I always kind of cycle through. And Wendy was saying something like, you know, the three of them working together for this album, like one knew what the other was going to play. They had this like synergy going between them. And, you know, one other little point that I would make about Wendy and Lisa at this point was that she also mentioned that, you know, and I think she was exaggerating to make a point, but she was like, he was pretty much a virtuoso. And she was like, we knew how to play one note, but we could play it well. Now, look, obviously they could play many more notes than one, and they were amazing. But she was just basically making the point that they knew what their job was and they did it really well.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about Lisa, she brought a different element for Prince when she joined the band, where she was classically trained. She taught him basically new chord structures, new ways to kind of form music that he had never even considered before, because he had only been exposed to certain types of music, you know. And then when she joined the band, it really expanded his horizons and just opened his mind to all kinds of different sounds. And like you said, Stephanie, you know, he really took it to the next level with the girls and being able to kind of take it to that next step.
And the string parts were composed by Prince and Lisa.
Mm-hmm.
Like she basically brought this skill to him. You know, I don't know that he knew much about orchestration, but she brought that in, and that's one of the things that she added to this thing. And she and Wendy did the conducting on the different sessions for the string recording, which I think is super cool. And they've all talked about how, particularly Dr. Fink and Wendy and Lisa have all talked about how even if it was a song that it was fully written by Prince, they all got to contribute to the arrangement of the song. They all got to pitch in. So this very much has a band feel to it. You know, I mean, to the point where the last 3 tracks on the album are based off of live recordings from First Avenue, and they did overdubs and stuff around that. But those live recordings of the band make those 3 songs, and it just changes. Especially, I mean, there were some places on 1999 where there are like live instruments, I'll say, instead of like, you know, programs and stuff like that. Yep. But it was still pretty much all Prince. This one actually has a collaborative feel about it. It actually feels like it's something bigger than he may have done on any previous album.
One more thing is that their voices together really have such a great impact. They have such a great blend. And he didn't use their voices as like background vocals. These are up front. You listen to that, their vocals are way up front, you know? They're singing together. It's not just like some little background thing. And I think that's such a huge part of their sound. I love the Revolution for that, and not just this record.
Yeah, I think the other interesting thing to look at too is timing with this, because by June of '84, the British New Wave second invasion is well into a year and a half at this point. And you've got Michael Jackson, you got some other people around, but Prince is pretty much putting the flag down and his boot down and saying enough. And he's got a record that's got enough like really great searing guitars in it that it can get played on, you know, any sort of like AOR rock station. It's got enough funk that it can get played on urban stations, and it's got enough pop that can get played on a pop station. And it's also got enough deeper cuts. It gets on college. So it's a record that touches on a lot of different spectrums and a lot of different places. So outside of, yes, he's a virtuoso, yes, he's on MTV. I know Steph, you said that he didn't know much about orchestration, but he definitely had a sense of visual style.
Mm-hmm.
That's in terms of like the presentation, of his live show, to like how he wants his album covers to work. But I think the fact that his videos were so stylish and done the way they did too, that also came along at the right time, because his videos at that point didn't look like any other videos that were around.
Yeah.
And I mean, it all does tie in with the film, but he also very shrewdly tied in, I've got a movie and a cinema and videos on MTV at the same time, and made that all work
100%.
in a very unique way.
His movie
And I
is
think
like a big video in a way.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
but he was very careful in how he planned all that out and sort of made it all work, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah, one of the crazy things about the look too was he orchestrated that to perfection, because he actually, according to Wendy and Lisa, the band actually had to wear their costumes out just to go down the street and get a sandwich.
Really?
Because he wanted them to be on and be presenting Prince and the Revolution every time they went out. And so they could never go out without wearing their concert uniforms.
I love it.
And we were talking about MTV. There was a fairly controversial music video for When Doves Cry. There wasn't an official music video for Let's Go Crazy, right?
It was just concert footage.
Yeah.
Not
exactly.
concert
And
footage.
It was
basically,
movie footage. Sorry.
Mhm.
basically that opening scene
That
from the
scene.
movie, but there wasn't I don't know that it was even released as a video, like to MTV or whatever, which is insane. Was there a music video for any of the other singles other than
I Would
just
Die for
movie clips?
Wasn't there I Would Die for You?
Nope.
Yeah,
that
but I think that
was
was
pulled from the movie too.
Oh, man.
They mostly were pulled from the movie. I think maybe Take Me With You had some.
Maybe I don't.
No, I don't think
know.
Take Me With You did, but Purple Rain was the movie.
Yeah, Purple Rain was the movie. So I think really
Yeah,
When
they
Doves
just-
Cry was the only one that was separate from the movie.
I guess right. I guess we've got all this footage we shot for the movie. We may as well use it.
They
Yeah.
had movie, there was a lot of flashing into the movie for that too. And that's interesting too. That came out like 5 months before the movie was even released. So I don't remember particularly, but I have to imagine when I first saw that, I was like, what is this footage, and where is that coming from, because it was from
Yeah.
the movie that wasn't out yet. But yes,
Right.
Rob, it's timing. I think about this a lot with artists. An artist can make an amazing album and nobody hears it, and sometimes there's just like kismet, I feel like. And he had that in spades. He had a phenomenal album that went along with a good movie. I don't know if it's it's not The Godfather, but it was a good movie, and he made it for like $7 million, and he made it like it was 70 million at the box office. So that's a success. And then he had a giant
Yeah.
tour. So, and timing
Yeah.
and people wanting to receive that at that time was the magic too.
And it also created a demand for the movie too.
Yeah.
Because that movie until 85 didn't screen in like Iowa or
Mhm.
Nebraska. Radio just propelled the hell out of that thing.
And that's one of the things I was thinking of. I was just kind of wondering which one drove which. Was it the success of the music that drove people to the theater to see the film? Was it the success of the film that kept driving singles off of the album? Or was it just this juggernaut of this big project that everything fed into each other? Because you don't get a perfect storm like that very often.
I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot since we introduced this topic. I think no matter what, that movie was going to draw to a black audience. No way that movie was not going to do well in some way, shape, or form. The fact that the movie broke out and did so well, I think really caught a lot of people by surprise. But I think the album coming out strong with When Doves Cry and Let's Go Crazy really sort of set the table for everything else. Because honestly, When Doves Cry was like funky and weird and interesting. And then Let's Go Crazy, that got played at football games in high school. It got played at dances. It got played on the radio. It got played at frat party. Once you got the white suburban kids to really like Let's Go Crazy, the rest of it fell into place.
Yeah.
So I think it was the radio stuff first and then the videos. And then that all sort of plugged into the movie. But that's just me.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that as well. I think the fact that the songs came out early and kind of whet the appetite kind of set the stage for Purple Rain. And then the movie came out and people went bananas for the movie. And then that's when all the other songs started being released as singles. Cause I think they only planned on releasing like 2 or 3 singles. And then they're like, oh crap, we got a big hit album here. Let's start pumping out, singles here left and right. And
then the tour, right? So it was like all.
And then the tour. Yeah, exactly. So it all kind of worked together as this great perfect storm.
So it all kinds of factors on whether or not When Doves Cry hits or not. Yeah. Because had that song not hit, had it not been the success that it was, you might not have got a second single. You might not have got people coming to the movie theater to see the film.
Right.
So really it was, because let's face it, When Doves Cry is a weird song, not just the lack of a bass line, but it's just the song structure, the harmonies, everything about it is just different than anything else that's happening. And that can either work for you or work against you. And, when you're expecting another song that sounds like 1999 or Little Red Corvette, Doves is not it, you know? So there was every chance that it might not have worked.
Interesting.
And that's the funny thing is you think of 1984 and you can't think of 1984 without When Doves Cry. It's the quintessential 80s song, but you're absolutely right, Alan. It was taking a big chance. And, if it doesn't work, who knows what happens? I think Rob's right. I think it was always going to do well with the African-American crowd, but, would it have really hit like it did with everybody else?
Yeah. So. We were talking about Minneapolis. This is where everything takes place. Everything centers around First Avenue, which is the club where all this stuff happens. What is the impact that this record has on the Minneapolis scene? Because we were talking earlier about the Minneapolis funk sound. And this really was the springboard for me. And it led me into lots of other stuff that was coming out of Minneapolis from here and after this. And, a lot of this comes from Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, 2 of my absolute music heroes. They were members of the time and they were starting to do production work outside because, when you're talking about I'm in the time, you're really like, it's Prince who's doing everything basically.
Right.
And so they're looking for production gigs out. And Prince is like, you know what? You're putting too much focus on the production. You're out. And they're like, fine, we'll go do bigger
Janet
stuff.
Jackson.
And they went on to Janet Jackson and Alexander O'Neill, and they formed their own company, Flight Time Productions. And they absolutely shaped the whole sound of that area. So talk a little bit about the impact that Purple Rain itself has on the Minneapolis sound.
So you've got, at roughly the same time, you've already got the Replacements, you've already got Husker Du, and, to a certain extent, Soul Asylum, some of these rock bands, right? But as we learned when we had Tommy Stinson on, even those guys were like, hey, what is this? This is really cool. I think the impact that doesn't get talked about is that very much in a Midwestern city that still struggles to this day with certain racial divides, it got literally, and musicians are cut from a different cloth. I get that. But literally everybody in that city benefited no matter what music you played. And it created a sense of musical energy. Bob Mould has talked about this a little bit, where people just felt like they were fearless and they could do whatever they want. And I think, too, Minneapolis has always been a live music city. And I think that the fact that the film had such a live component to it really resonated well there. So I think it's, again, cyclical, where, it creates this huge movement of artists and stuff that are getting popular. But Minneapolis had an incredible musical culture for a while. You've got a lot of really great R&B, and this is sort of never really talked about, I think, much in the common circles about Prince, but it's deeply rooted in certain types of gospel music. So I think that it combines everything and comes into Prince's music, and then Prince puts it in a blender and puts it out, and then everybody wants to go to these sites from the movie. First Avenues today, there's still people that come to First Avenue just to get their picture taken because it's Purple Rain. They've got, the Prince murals over by there as well. It's kind of a cottage industry. And then Prince is able to build Paisley Park. And once he builds Paisley Park, it's cool because then no matter who you are, what band that comes into town, Prince doesn't want to go see your show, but he'll invite you to come out to Paisley Park and jam. So then you're playing a gig at 1 or 2 in the morning with Prince and just whoever else just happens to be there. So I think it really sort of put Minneapolis on a map equal to like Chicago or Austin or some of these movements, musical cities at the time that were also taking off. And I think that it most benefited soul, black music, and funk, obviously.
Yeah.
But it also bled back into rock musicians. It brought a lot of people into Minneapolis. And there was, much like any city, like Seattle in the 90s, there was a rash of musical signings from Minneapolis once Prince broke. I mean, Jesse Johnson, I think you've got The Time and all these other sort of, everybody's in Minneapolis looking for the next Prince.
The one thing that I will kind of talk about, though, is that Prince was already a legend in Minneapolis long before Purple Rain. Everybody knew who Prince was in Minneapolis. I don't think it was really a national thing until Purple Rain. I think Purple Rain introduced the rest of the world to the Minneapolis sound. But it was already well in its growth in Minneapolis before Purple Rain.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to kind of mention that I think a lot of the influence that he has been able to kind of provide was all the way to his death. Like you mentioned, Rob, with Paisley Park, he began to mentor a lot of young folks that were coming into Minneapolis and into Chanhassen to try to work with Prince and really learn from the master of musicology, basically. He wrote the album, right? and he basically tried to pass a lot of what he learned on. But the challenge for him, though, was he's different than most folks because, the moment that he wakes up, he thinks about writing music and thinks about music. It's not a job to him. It's basically a life.
Yeah.
And for a lot of the young kids, it was kind of hard for them to kind of grasp that. And I think that was probably one of the biggest influences is that, especially for like folks like Alicia Keys and people like that, where, they learned from him that, if you want to really make it, you have to live it.
Yeah. And I think, Rob, one thing that you said is so true. It's like, the whole movie was set there. He was driving his bike around the whole, you see Minneapolis, you see landmarks, you want to be there and you want to go see where those places are. And one little tidbit was that they paid the First Avenue $100,000 and they just closed it for 25 days and they filmed it. They took it over and filmed. So, I mean, obviously that's like the focal point of the whole movie, really. But, I think that brought tourism, business, whatever to the city as well.
Yeah, I'm actually really disappointed I didn't get over to First Avenue when I went to Minneapolis.
Oh man.
Yeah.
In our last episode, when we were talking about the second half of our 1984 discussion, I pointed out that within a 1 month stretch, the Purple Rain soundtrack, The Times Ice Cream Castles, and Glamorous Life by Sheila E. all came out within 4 weeks. That's insane.
It is.
Because that's pretty much all Prince, That's crazy. And he owned the second half of 1984 because all of those albums were enormous hits. He just had so much just oozing out of his pores,
Also, that's what I was like, in a way to what I was saying before, like when you like sometimes there's periods in artists' lives when they're just on fire. And I think like he was there to receive the messages of all the songs that were coming in, and he was divvying them out too. He was, writing them for people, but he was so just receiving that creative gift at that moment. And it was just his time, it really was. It was his time, no pun intended, but. And
part of it was also the limitations of Warner Brothers because obviously they didn't want to oversaturate. So he used the time and he used the family and he used Sheila as ways to get all of his music out of him. Yeah. Without being restricted by Warner Brothers and having them prevent him from releasing it.
Exactly.
Right. And I think I pointed this out in the last 1984 episode we did. But, again, he also wrote under the pseudonym Christopher for the Bangles. He wrote Manic Monday, too. And that came out on their album and, the next album. So that was that time that he wrote that. So.
Yeah, he had a couple of pseudonyms that were going around at that time where he's just issuing.
Alexander Nevermind.
Yeah.
Yes. All kinds of.
Jamie Starr. Yep.
Jamie Starr.
Yep.
Since we're talking about the scene and we're talking about this album, let's actually talk about the music. Talk about the different tracks on the album and what are some of your standouts? What are your favorite songs on the record? I mean, I know all of them, but seriously.
So this is one of the few Prince albums that I love every single song. You know, there's a lot of times when there are some songs that are just too weird for me, you know, even as a Prince fan. But you know, Purple Rain is one of those rare albums where every single song, I believe, could stand on its own. I will say my least favorite song on the album is Take Me With You.
Because that's my favorite.
That's
so funny.
Let me qualify, Stephanie, because I feel like Apollonia is a horrible singer.
Yeah.
and I think she dragged the track down. But other than that song, the title track, Purple Rain, is just so legendary. And it's kind of funny. I have a rule with my wife is anytime the guitar solo hits, nobody can talk because we have to listen to the guitar solo. Let's Go Crazy is, you know, we've talked about it ad nauseum already. You know, it was played everywhere. Even songs like Darling Nikki and Computer Blue that, you know, that were just enough of that sexy weirdness that Prince brings, but it was still good rock songs and it had great solos and, you know, had a great storytelling element to them. And it was always very interesting. And then, of course, I Would Die For You and Baby I'm a Star. They're kind of a package deal where, you know, they wrap up the movie and they're so good together and they fit so well together. So
totally. I have to say, Take Me With You is my favorite. Though, you know, I know you're saying Apollonia. I understand, but she also was kind of ghost vocaled on that by Jill and Lisa. So
yeah. Lisa helped a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It would sound a lot worse if it weren't for the additional voices there.
I just think it's such a catchy and hooky song. But I also love I Would Die For You because that's also, that's almost like weird in the way that When Doves Cry is. I think it's just got a oddness to it that I don't know. I really love it. I think my least favorite is probably Computer Blue, and I might get some shit for that, but I don't know why, but I do really love Darling Nikki as well. And I know it's, you know, pretty raunchy or whatever. And that was what we were also talking about on another episode. I believe the PMRC. Is it PMRC?
Yes, it is.
I think that's when Tipper Gore, like, that was a tipping. Yeah. No pun intended again for her.
That was a tipping point. No pun intended.
They said I read she like walked into her kid's room and her kid was like 11 listening to Darling Nikki and she was like, what? That sort of
one lyric came on.
Yeah.
So the interesting thing about what you're talking about there is that there were like the late 83, he put together kind of a preliminary, what he thought was going to be the track list for this album. And Take Me With You is not one of the songs. It's not there yet. Mm-hmm. And neither is the song Purple Rain. There was a song on side 1 called Wednesday. And on side 2, Father's Song, which was the thing that Prince's father had written and had given to Prince to use, you know, just use this however you want. And that became sort of a thematic thing that works throughout the movie and the album. But I think that's really interesting, the way that these things evolve, you know, that Take Me With You wasn't there to start with. And When Doves Cry wasn't really early on, because I think that was the last thing that he wrote for the album.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're like, can you do one more song that sort of fits the theme of the whole thing? And he's like, okay, let me bust this thing out.
Which is the first single, Bananas.
Right. And that's happened a number of times. That happened with Kiss. That happened with on a couple of other Prince albums too. The last thing he wrote becomes the first single from the album. But, you know, I think Computer Blue is phenomenal. I love it so much because it's got such a different arrangement. Like, it doesn't sound like any other Prince song. And I'm not just from this album, but from anywhere. I think it's got the most interesting arrangement, and it always is giving you something new, you know? I love it. But another one that I really dig, and I didn't like this one at first. It was kind of a slow burn for me, and it took me a a while to really connect to it, and that is The Beautiful Ones. And now it's like possibly my favorite song on the album. Oh my God. You got any faves, Rob?
Well, Steph touched on a lot of mine.
Well, there's only 9 to pick from.
I know.
Yeah, no, Steph pretty much nailed all of mine. The thing that I remember too is I remember going to all these high school dances, and "Take Me With You" was one of the big things that they played. So I have a soft spot for that one, and I know Jason hates it, but that's okay. And
I don't hate it. I don't hate
it.
Computer Blue was interesting because that's the one they went to college radio with.
Yeah, I can see why.
I first heard it, the little piddly 100-watt college radio station I used to listen to in my bedroom. I remember they played it, the Friday night alternative, Fresh Sounds show guy was playing that. And he's like, hey, this record's for everybody, What was interesting is, and this is, again, the stupidity of youth, because we're fearless when we're young, but we're also dumb. I thought Purple Rain was like, God, is this thing ever going to fucking end, right?
Well, I kind of feel that way now.
Yeah. And so now it's like, okay, I'm like, to me, it's about a minute and a half too long, but I do appreciate the craftsmanship that went into it, if that makes any sense.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's the big change about it. And I have to kind of be in a place to hear it and like it. But I think that where it's placed on the album is perfect. But if I have to pick just one, it's Take Me With You.
Yeah.
It boils everything that Prince does into one song that's popular that can go across the board without diluting who Prince is as an artist.
It's like a precursor to Raspberry Beret, I feel like.
Yeah, it definitely is. It's definitely in that same vein. So talking about Computer Blue, that leads me into 2017. After Prince's death, they reissue this album with like 800 discs, and there is an entire disc that's got vault tracks, like stuff that's never been released, never been heard by the public. One of those is the full, there's Computer Blue. What we hear on the album is like a third of what it actually is. There's a full 12-minute version of this thing, which is dubbed the hallway speech version.
Yeah.
And that was, people like have always wanted to hear that. People in the know, but it finally comes out in 2017 with all these other really, really interesting songs from the Prince vault that have never been uncovered before. So, Jason, what are some of your favorites on that release?
I definitely love the hallway speech version of Computer Blue. Absolutely. It was something that, despite having some of the, unreleased tracks that you get in certain ways, I had never heard the full hallway speech version of Computer Blue before. And it was an amazing experience, to say the least. I don't know what I was expecting, but I don't think I was expecting that. And that was pretty impressive. Some of the Roadhouse Garden stuff was pretty interesting too.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the tracks like Wonderful Ass and Velvet Kitty Cat and Katrina's Paper Dolls were all real interesting. And of course, we can, I guess I can say it. We can fuck.
Say it.
Yeah, we can fuck.
Yeah, Prince eventually turned that into We Can Funk for the Graffiti Bridge album, but it was definitely an interesting early version of that song. I think the one that I loved the most though was Father's Song, because I'd always wanted to have that version of the song. It was one of my favorite parts of Purple Rain was when he goes to the piano and starts the song, and I always wanted to have that version of the song. I will say, though, I was a little disappointed with all the 80s synthesizers towards the end of the song because I felt it kind of threw it off a little bit. But overall, I think it's just a beautiful composition, and I just love it.
Yeah. I loved all those tracks. I thought there was some really cool stuff on there that it kind of all surprises you,
Mm-hmm.
And I really enjoyed hearing all that stuff. Roadhouse Garden, as you talked about, I thought was really great. And Katrina's Paper Dolls, I loved. So it's an interesting thing. I mean, Velvet Kitty Cat, come on. Come on, Prince. So we were talking about the tour, the Purple Rain tour, which was a huge tour. and the opening act was Sheila E. and her band, and the first band that comes on is, of course, Apollonia 6.
Mm-hmm.
And I never got the chance to see Prince live.
Me too. Me neither.
Now, what I'll say is I had chances and I didn't take them, especially that last time where Atlanta ends up being the final show he ever played in his life, and he was dead a week later. And I should have gone. And the only reason I didn't, and I said this before on our show, the only reason I didn't is because it was him and a piano. And I thought, well, do I really want my first time seeing Prince to not be with a band?
Ooh,
so I didn't go. Oh, that's one of the stupidest decisions I've ever made in my entire life. One of my greatest musical regrets.
Me too. Yeah, me too.
Oh my gosh.
It was kind of funny because that concert in Atlanta, it was like, I knew he was coming to Atlanta, and he didn't really have any dates in Florida. So I was like, maybe next year he'll come to Florida,
Yeah.
And so I didn't go, and I could have went, but I didn't go. And it, like you, it's one of my greatest regrets. I did see Prince live. I saw him 3 times. I saw him when I was a kid in 1985. It was the very end of the Purple Rain tour, so I got to see the Purple Rain tour.
Holy
in Lakeland, Florida, and that basically, that basically
because that was the last show was in Miami. The 2 before that were Lakeland, so it was the very end of the tour.
Yeah, it was like right at the end of the tour, and that basically cemented it for me as a Prince fan. I mean, it was like, I knew I already loved him and the music, and when I saw him perform in concert, it was over.
Did you go with your mom? I want to know.
Yes.
I was going to ask that too.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I went with my mom.
Good mom.
One of the great memories with my mom.
Oh.
And then in the 2000s, I saw him a couple times. I think with Larry Graham and a few other bands, but yeah.
Nice. Wow.
Did you ever see him, Rob?
So he played the Gateway Center in Collinsville, Illinois. He played for 3 hours. And it was probably 98, 99, or maybe 2000-ish, where he was still touring, but he wasn't selling out a ton of places. And this is just some promoter couldn't get a venue because everything was booked, so they put him there. And he played, I think, in front of 600 people. And it was like...
Wow.
And he didn't do a lot of the hits, which I thought was really cool. He
was off the hits at that time. He didn't do a lot.
Yeah, and I really loved that because it was like he was really doing a lot more experimentation. So it was seeing, a different Prince than the Prince I'd grown up with. But by that time, I'd matured enough to really appreciate all the nuances of Prince outside of the hits. So for that, it was fantastic.
I never saw Prince, as I said, but in, 2017, 2018, The Revolution toured. And I did see that. And holy shit, was that a great show.
Yep.
Oh my gosh. It was just the band. And they just got up and they played like everything that you would want them to play from their albums. And they played a few things from 1999. And
was Andre Simone with them?
No.
Oh.
But so most of the lead vocals were done either by Wendy or by Brown Mark.
Oh.
And then they had another guy who was going around with them who did any song that was a falsetto kind of song, like Kiss or that kind of thing. And so he did all of those songs. And it was just an amazing show. And then, of course, their encores were those last 3 songs from Purple Rain. And on Baby, I'm a Star, they did like a pickup thing in every city they went to. They just had local drag queens just come out on stage and just do their thing. And it was amazing.
That's awesome.
That's so great. Oh, wow.
And if I remember rightly, they opened with America. And the second song they played was Mountains. And I'm like, well, that's the 2 songs that I would most want to hear. So this is a complete evening for me. And we're only 2 songs in.
Wow.
And they were just, and they what they did was they showed what a damn good band they are.
They were great.
Oh man, it was great. Plus I never got to see Wendy and Lisa live. So that was my first opportunity to see them.
Well,
and that was just
I
mesmerizing.
talked about that before. That was one of the greatest shows I ever saw was Wendy and Lisa at the Bottom Line for the Arroyo tour on 1990.
Oh yeah.
Literally, I can remember it's almost like I can't even, I was almost in tears. It was such a great show seeing all those amazing women on stage and just,
Yeah.
and that album also, Eroica, was just one of
Oh
my
man,
favorites.
it's so great.
Time.
It's
Oh,
so great.
there's
Their
every
first three albums, you just cannot,
I know.
argue with any of their first three albums. They're so good.
I know. Oh God, I love them.
Oh,
God, I love
amazing.
them. And Girl Brothers is so great too. I wish I could see. Oh, anyway.
Yep.
Okay. We're gonna go off on a whole other Wendy and Lisa episode.
We could do it.
We could.
We could do it. All right. So my last question, is this the best Prince album? Or is there another album somewhere that, even if it wasn't more successful, is a better album than Purple Rain?
Rob shaking his head.
Mm.
Sign of the Times is,
It's a masterpiece.
I think that Sign of the Times is everything he couldn't do on Purple Rain on Speed. I also think that it's not just an album that's about, sex and soul and funk. It's like, it's got some real resonating stuff in there. It's very much a political album. It's very much a dance album. And, it's just at that point, Prince is a complete, total master of everything he's doing from every aspect of his career. And it's the scope of that record, I think, is what makes it better than 1990 or Purple Rain. It's just the sheer scope of it. And I also like 1999 because it's got this raw hunger to it. You can tell when you hear that album, and not the hits, that this is a guy that wants it. And this is a guy that's not just making a record to fuck around.
Right.
First time I heard 1999, I'm like, okay, I don't know what this is, but this is amazing.
I know.
Right? That was a gateway drug for me to a lot of other types of music. That was my gateway to Chic. That was my gateway to Parliament.
Stephanie, you want to go?
Well, I do think this is my favorite Prince album, and I think you said that before too. And so I don't know. I don't think there's I don't like Computer Blue that much, but I don't think there's really a bad song on this album. This is pretty much a pinnacle, I feel like, for me at least.
So for me, it's kind of an interesting dichotomy because I agree with Rob. I think Sign of the Times was his best album. It's top to bottom his most ambitious album. It has some of the best songs that he's ever done. It's a fantastic album. It's it's one of my favorite albums that he does, that he has. I am not one of those Prince fans that likes to pretend like I hate Purple Rain.
Right.
That seems to be a thing with the Prince family. I don't know why we got to do that, but just because we got to be cool. No, we don't like Purple Rain. We like all of his deep cuts. No, Purple Rain was a fantastic album, guys. Come on.
Yeah.
My personal favorite Prince album is actually Controversy. I love.
Oh, nice.
I love his work with the Limb. I love his work, with all the different sounds and different ways that he approached his falsetto within the Sexuality song is just kind of amazing to me. Mm-hmm. I don't know how he hits some of those notes, but yeah, I mean, for me, Controversy is my favorite Prince album, but Sign of the Times I think is his best album.
Right. I think I'm right there on Purple Rain is the perfect Prince album. Now there's some other ones that I think are right along that same footing, and Sign of the Times is certainly one of those. I mean, that is just an incredible record. And I think that is maybe the best work he ever did. It's a double album, so there's a lot more opportunity for, a weak track here or there. So I don't think it is as consistent top to bottom as Purple Rain is, but it's still incredible. Now, another one that I think is almost like super close, as good as Purple Rain, is the next one, Around the World in a Day, which I just absolutely love. And I also have a real soft, Diamonds and Pearls, I will say, is a great record as well.
Yeah.
And I have a super close love relationship with Chaos and Disorder.
Yeah.
It's not an obvious pick, and it's very much more of a rock album than anything else, but I just love it.
The funny thing about Chaos and Disorder is when I was a kid, I didn't like it. But as I've gotten older, I've learned to appreciate that album, and I absolutely love it too. It's a great album.
It's one of the few true band albums he ever did, and it's got really interesting song arrangements, and it's just great. So, listeners, go check out Chaos and Disorder.
It is really hard though to pick one album because I feel like, well, and it's obviously like this with so many artists, but like there's just he's got like genius on every album. And if it's not a thorough album, if it's not an album full of genius, there's moments, and they're so great that it's hard to say, oh no, this isn't something that I'm going to pick, because you can't discount those songs. So I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's like hard for me to pick for sure, but I still
right.
Purple Rain. But yeah,
it's funny. I like to say that today it's Sign of the Times. Ask me tomorrow.
yeah.
All right. Well, we are going to take a quick break here, and we are going to come back and do a little wrap up. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back in 30 seconds.
What's the funniest thing in Star Trek?
When Worf found out that Keiko O'Brien was having another baby.
What's the funniest thing in Star Trek?
Blindfolded martial arts with glowy sticks.
What's the funniest thing in Star Trek?
When Wei Yun said, well, time to start packing. Start it off again, Veronica.
What's the funniest thing in Star Trek? Quark killed a Klingon.
Find more on Earth Station Trek, a podcast about Star Trek.
On the ESO Network. Okay, we are back. All right, Jason, thank you so much for joining us I know how much you love talking about Prince. So, I really was glad that you're able to join us for this. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
What are some other things that people can check out if they would be interested in hearing more about Jason De La Torre?
I've dabbled in about just about every multimedia thing you can think of, movies, podcasts, all kinds of things. But probably my main things that I've produced are 2 fiction podcasts. One is called Continuum Force, which is kind of like Doctor Who meets Stargate. And then the other one is called The Vampires of Whitechapel, and I made it because I was mad at Twilight and wanted vampires that didn't suck. So yeah, Vampires of Whitechapel actually just recently wrapped up, so it's a full story. So you guys can check that out. And what I'm currently working on right now is actually I'm building a historical YouTube channel where I'm going to have like documentaries and biopics and things like that, little shorts that of historical facts and information. It's called Ancient Memoria. So hopefully you guys can check it out. And there's not much on there right now, but I'm working on a Queen Isabella of Spain biopic right now that the first episode should be dropping very, very soon.
That is super cool.
Cool.
All right, Steph, where can people who are hungry for more information about Stephanie Seymour find more about you?
Okay. You can find me on Facebook at Stephanie Seymour Music. You can find me on Instagram at there_r_birds. And I also have a website, therearebirds.com. And you can find me on Bandcamp under my name, and on Spotify and all the other, platforms like that for my music.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Rob.
So you can find me on the Book of Face and the X, Twitter, whatever the hell that thing is, and Blue Sky and Post, which I think is still a thing, and LinkedIn. So you can find me on all those platforms. And then I co-host the Weekend Justice podcast for needcoffee.com. And I have, perhaps you've heard, I dabble a little in radio. So if you're sticking around on Wednesdays, I do a show called Juxtaposition on KDHX. Year 30 starts August 29th. And that's Wednesdays from 7 to 9 Central. You can listen to it live, or if you've got something else going on, you can listen to the streaming archives at kdhx.org. They're archived. Every show is archived for 2 weeks. And then Mondays is insane, because Mondays from 12 to 2 Central, or 1 to 3 Eastern, or 6 to 8 Greenwich Mean Time, which only really matters to Anthony, is my show called Antics on Louder Than War Radio. And That's also available to stream on their Mixcloud page. All previous 64 editions of that are available to stream. And then the newest thing is the Face Radio, which is Mondays from 5 to 7 Central, whatever Eastern, and then it repeats on Tuesday mornings from 7 to 9 Central. And that show is called The Free Design, and there is an yet to be unnamed music interview show coming to the Face Radio as well that we're fleshing out. So look forward to that, and that's where we are.
And I probably should mention my X Twitter handle as well. I completely forgot to mention it.
It's easy to forget X and Twitter.
Yeah, it's at JC Delatorre. So.
Excellent. Rob, you should post, each week links to your shows on the Modern Musicology Facebook page or something.
Okay.
Once
I wasn't sure if I could do that. So
yeah, of course you can. Absolutely. So we're going to be back in 2 weeks, and we have a very special guest then. And Rob, why don't you tell us who we have coming?
So we have Rob Drew on, and he has written several books. He also teaches. So he's a real music academic. We're all lightweights next to this guy. But he has a book out called Unspooled, How the Cassette Made Music Shareable. And so it's a little bit about the history of the cassette, which is incredibly fascinating to weird music people like us. But it also looks at the mixtape culture, and cassette tapes were sort of the first way we shared music. Because it really wasn't easy to take your 78s over to your neighbor's house to play on their Victrola, right? And I certainly knew that if I was around in the 60s and 70s with all those great records, I probably wouldn't have lent them out. Yeah, it really sort of broke down a lot of barriers, and a lot of people could mix musical styles and songs, and it sort of created the idea of putting songs back to back, and so it looks at a lot of different things, and it'll be interesting because even though it's a very sort of educational book, there is a lot of really great pop culture nuggets in there as well.
Cool. I'm so excited to talk to him about this book. That's going to be really great.
Yeah, I know. I tape songs off the radio.
Oh my God, so did I.
Me too.
And I have literally found all of my tapes.
Oh, I have them all too. I have them.
In 2005.
Oh, wow.
Including the time when Stephanie was on KCFE talking about the Aquanettas.
Oh.
No way. I want to hear that.
Oh, you should definitely digitize that.
Yeah.
I got to figure out how to do all that.
Yeah, I know. All right. So join us in 2 weeks for a great discussion with author Rob Drew. Till then, everybody take care. Have a great week and keep rocking on.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.